Great seeing everybody here. It's a little interesting Sunday for us. It's a little bittersweet, right? And so we've been talking about going to our new space, a new facility, and it's really exciting for us because TK didn't make it very subtle, but really that's the reason why we exist. It's not about the space, not about the facility, but it's about the impact that we make in people's lives, and it's about the transformation that takes place. And whether that's here or a different location or what have you, space to a certain extent isn't that important. But I was sharing this morning to our team before we set up, or before we started, is that space still does matter. And God has used spaces throughout history. And for us, I'd love for this to be kind of our Bethel place, where we look back and we just see God's faithfulness in everything that we do, and just God's grace in all the work that He does. But also anticipate as we go into a new space or new facility for that to continue. So it's kind of a bittersweet thing. And we'll probably talk about it a little bit more as we continue on. But Rome is also, the people of Rome, they've been so amazing to us. They are both excited for us. When I told them that we got our new space, the manager here, he just bear hugged me. He was so happy for us. But then at the same time, they're kind of sad, right? Because we've had such a great relationship with them. And so we're thinking of ways to be able to honor them. We're thinking of ways to be able to just thank them for the incredible work that they have done as well. But this is also kind of reminiscent a little bit. I was telling everyone in the morning kind of how we started. We started with our puny little speakers. I don't even know if we had speakers back in the day. All the other stuff, the reason why we look like this is everything else is in our new place. It's all there. We want to thank also everyone who's been so faithful to help us. Just moving. Yesterday we spent hours building and cleaning and installing things. We'll need a little bit more help later this week. I'll put out a message because the hurricane delayed our shipment. So things that we were supposed to do yesterday, we can't do until whenever it arrives. So you might get another notification from me. But just want to thank everybody. They were there from 9:30 yesterday till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we got so much work done. And we appreciate that. And thank you for everyone a few weeks ago who helped us move. And then we even started last night there with, it was just a small gathering, but it was still, I think, very wonderful and powerful for us to start. The very first thing there was with prayer, and just laying the foundation of prayer in our new space. So we're really excited. That's what next week's going to be. And we're hoping that God will continue to write another chapter in His incredible just faithfulness in our story here. I don't know, do we have Build Team here? Build Team are the happiest people at the church right now. If you don't know who the Build Team are the people that come and build all the equipment, do the chairs, fix the chairs. They're the ones that put up signs. They're the ones who do all the grunt work of the church that enable us to have church every single week. And after you guys go home, before they get to leave, they have to break everything down. They have to fix everything and put everything back. They're the happiest people right now. Because when we go to the new space, they don't have to do that anymore. And but they've been incredible. And I don't know if we have people from way back when, but just to give you a little bit of perspective, way back when, we actually had to take SUVs and trucks to a storage unit, take everything out of the storage unit, load it onto SUVs and trucks, take it to our facility, i.e. Rome Dunwoody, because we didn't have storage there, unload our trucks and SUVs, take it upstairs, set up all the equipment, have church, break it all down, put it back into the trucks and SUVs, take it back to storage, and up back into storage. We did that every single week for years. And when we came here, we thought it was like heaven because they gave us a storage unit, so we didn't have to do that part, but we still had to build up and break down every week. So we just wanted to thank the Build Team. I don't know if you've ever served on the Build Team at the church. Can we stand up? Is anyone here from the Build Team today? Yeah. No one's here. I'm talking about them. They're not even here, man. They're so exhausted. They're like, we're done. We're out of here. But if you are on the Build Team, thank you guys. If you ever served on the Build Team, thank you. Because really, it's the backbone of the church in many ways. And they're officially retired as a ministry. We no longer have the Build Team anymore. And so hopefully they'll still be at the church. Just because we have every other ministry doesn't mean that they shouldn't come here. But I think it's just one of those Sundays where they're not here. But we'll recognize them again. But just want to thank all the Build Team for the incredible work that they've done. All right. So with that being said, we're going to jump into our final message here at 4 Points here at Rome. But we're going to also be concluding our series that we've been starting, or we started a month ago, on missions and or outreach, what we call across the street, across the state, across the seas. And it's an opportunity for us to talk about local and global missions or local and global outreach that we think is incredibly important for us as followers of Jesus, but also incredibly important for us as a church. Now, if you know me, you probably know me with glasses. I've worn glasses pretty much my entire life, religiously since I was in college. Until college, I didn't really like glasses. In fact, when I played high school basketball, I didn't wear my glasses because my right eye was close to perfect, but I didn't realize this until much later on in life, but my left eye is really messed up. And so I didn't realize this, but my right eye and left eye my left eye just exists for like depth perception, I realized. But my left eye is awful. If I take off my glasses right now, and these newer lenses, they're like cut so thin, but it's like a Coke bottle on my left eye. And if I were to take off my glasses and if I were to stare at you guys, if I close my right eye, I wouldn't be able to see anybody here. You guys would all just look blurry. Like Lori and Josh's face, I wouldn't be able to make it out. My left eye would just see blurriness. I'll see your hair and your face, and I can make out that you have eyes and nose, but I wouldn't be able to make out any of the details. And as a result, without my glasses, I have to see things especially if I close my right eye, I can't see things far away. I have like incredibly strong bad nearsightedness. I'm not exactly sure what the correct phrasing is. With my left eye, I can't see very far. I can see only very close up. And as a result, I'm incredibly nearsighted, especially with my left eye. The reason I share that is I think spiritually speaking, and specifically speaking with our perception or experience or understanding of outreach, I think for many of us we're equally very nearsighted. We have a very myopic view. And what I mean by this is that we only tend to see things that are close to us in proximity with our life. We only tend to see or engage with, or things that really matter to us in our lives, or things that are super immediate. What I mean by this is that we are focusing our entire reality of what's happening globally, even here in the United States, especially spiritually, with only things that we're able to physically see or physically experience in a very close proximity. But the reality is that there is an ongoing spiritual battle that exists not just here, not just in your life, not just here in the Metro Atlanta area, not just here in Georgia, not just here in the United States, but globally. And the spiritual battle is really the state or the future of people's eternity at stake here, right? And that's happening globally, where there is literally millions and billions of people throughout the world that don't know who Jesus is, that don't have an experience with Jesus, that don't have an encounter with Jesus, but yet, because we are so myopic, because we are so nearsighted, they're out of sight, out of mind. Isn't that true? If things are out of sight, it's out of mind for us. But what we're going to see here in our passage this morning when we read it is from the perspective of God. From a spiritual perspective, God sees things globally. God sees things eternally, but God sees things globally. And when God sees, and when we see it from the perspective of Jesus, what we're going to realize is that to Jesus, everything is immediate. And to Jesus, he sees the world in its entirety, and as a result, he sees the millions and billions of people that are far from him, that need to hear this incredible message of the gospel. We say the gospel is good news. We use that phrase all the time. We say the gospel is fantastic news, but if it's so good, should it not be shared? Should it not be revealed to others who so desperately, equally need to hear this good news? Here's the catch that we're going to see from our passage is that the harvest is bountiful. It's massive. It's huge. But what is missing are the workers. Because the workers are few. My hope is that as we close out our series here, that we too will recognize that the harvest is plenty, but that we will recognize that this harvest and the responsibility of this harvest is not for others. We've been talking about this a little bit, right? It's not for career missionaries. It's not for pastors. It's not for the super mature Christians, but it's for all followers of Jesus. The responsibility is for all followers of Jesus. Everyone who says that they are a disciple of Jesus Christ, it is our call to participate in this harvest. So if you have your Bibles, let's open up to Matthew chapter 9, verse 35 to 38. It's a familiar passage for many of us. Matthew chapter 9, verse 35, 38. And the Word of God says this. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to the disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. The Lord of the harvest, therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. So this morning, I just want to focus on two principles that I believe that this passage is talking to every one of us about. And the first truth is this. Those with spirit-filled eyes will have compassion. And we see this in verse 36. In verse 36 again it says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion, referring to Jesus. Now, if I'm being completely honest, the past 3-4 weeks have been incredibly exhausting. It's been exhausting physically, it's been exhausting mentally, it's just been exhausting because of the incredible work that has to go into getting this space ready. And I'm not saying this to toot our own horns, but the staff, many of us, I know my wife and I, we've been there Monday to Monday. Like for the past 3-4 weeks. Like we've been there every single day, getting things ready, building things, fixing things. It's just been exhausting. We've been there all day, every day. And then I haven't actually even had a chance to, I was telling my wife, like, if I'm being fully transparent here, this is the least amount I prepare for a message in the history of my pastorate. It's like, I had so little time, right? And there's things administratively that I have to do that I haven't even touched. Like this morning, we finally got our insurance all finalized, and this morning before service was the first time in this entire week that I was able to reply to some emails from our insurance agent just to get it all concluded, because we have to have it by October 1st. It's been exhausting. And there's been so much work that has to go, and I'm not saying this to say, oh, look at how much work we've done. I'm just saying I'm exhausted. I'm physically exhausted, I'm mentally exhausted, emotionally exhausted. And as a result, I have very little compassion. When you're exhausted, you have very little compassion, right? Yesterday, on the way home, after our prayer meeting, some crazy person cut me off, right? And my wife's like, we just came from service. I was like, yeah, but this guy just did something dumb. I had very little compassion for this person, right? My compassion level is very, very low. But if you look at Jesus, Jesus sees the crowd and immediately he has compassion. But what you have to see is you have to look at what he has done prior to this. Because if you look at what he's done prior to this, he has done incredible amount of work, way more work than I've done. He's healed paralyzed men, he's had meals with tax collectors, he deals with hypocritical religious leaders. I can't imagine how difficult that might be, right? And he heals a bleeding woman, he restores a girl to life, he heals a blind man, the list goes on and on and on and on. He's been doing this day in and day out, and yet, when he sees a crowd, instead of getting annoyed, instead of getting, oh man, here I go again, instead of saying, no, I'm too tired to deal with them, he has compassion. He's moved to compassion. The word compassion in the Greek, it's this idea, it's this sense of like inner, it's a movement from your inner parts that you just can't help but do. It's almost, it's kind of it could be a little disgusting imagery, but it's almost a biological movement. Like you just can't help it, right? It's your body is so just needing to do something, you just can't help it. And so Jesus, when he sees the people, he can't help it. He has to. He just has to. The question for us is when we see people who need Jesus, do we have compassion? Or maybe the better question is, are we even seeing these people? Are we even having spiritual eyes to see these people? You know, this past couple weeks, I've been borrowing people's trucks. So if you have a truck and haven't asked, then I might ask you, because I feel bad asking the same person over and over again. So, but one of the trucks, the first truck I borrowed was one of our church members at F-150, Ford F-150 4x4. It looks just like this. And I love that. I was like, man, this is great. Pretty decent gas mileage for a big truck. And I was trying to convince my wife, hey, we need a truck. Pastor should have a truck. And she said no. So that was the end of the discussion there. But as I drove this truck for a couple of days, something interesting happened. I mean, I knew that there were a lot of F-150s around, but man, everywhere I turned, I felt like I saw an F-150 4x4. Like everywhere. Why? Because I was now driving one. I was much more cognizant of it. I was actually more aware of what was happening. Even though I kind of peripherally saw a lot of F-150s, these past couple of weeks, I've seen so many F-150, specifically 4x4. In fact, I saw one this morning coming in, and I was like, hey, honey, you should buy that car. She's like, nope. So I tried again, and she still said no. And I see it everywhere because now I am in tune. In fact, there's a psychological phenomenon named for this. It's called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. When you are aware of something, you start noticing it way more. That's what it means to be Spirit-filled. The reason why we are not noticing the needs of the people, both locally and globally, is that we're not seeing with Spirit-filled eyes. We're too myopic. We're too nearsighted. We're so focused on our busyness. Are we not? You're so focused on your busyness, you can't see beyond that. And I'm just going to put it out there, but a lot of that busyness is our self-creation. We've created it. No one asked you to live this busy life. You created it. And the negative, unintended, or possibly the intended consequence of that is that we can't see beyond that. Or we can't see beyond what I talked about last week, right? Our comfort, our luxuries, our affluence. You can't see beyond that. Or maybe more accurately, we don't want to see beyond that. And consequently, when we hear of just things happening around the world, we hear of stories where people are desperately searching, seeking for compassion and grace, and need people like us to participate in that giving of compassion and grace. We turn a blind eye. They're just statistics. It's something that happens way over there. I believe that if we see with Spirit-filled eyes as Jesus sees, it's going to lead us to have compassion-filled eyes. That we're going to be able to see the compassion, people who need compassion, both locally and globally. But it begins with us putting on Spirit-filled lenses and being able to see as Christ sees. But the second truth that I want to point out here this morning is this: that those with Spirit-filled eyes are the ones who will work for the harvest. And we see this in verses 37 to 38. This is the second one. And what I mean by this is that to feel compassion is so much more than feeling sorry for somebody. That's not compassion. That's pity. At best, that's empathy. Compassion isn't just looking at a situation, looking at the world vision picture, looking at different situations in the world and say, oh man, I feel so sorry for them. That's not compassion, that's pity. Oh man, I can't believe that's happening. That's not compassion, that's pity. Compassion, as I stated earlier, it's an action. Compassion is not potential. It's kinetic, it's action, something that we do. It's got to be tangible. So when Jesus looks upon the crowds, he doesn't just feel sorry for them, he is moved to action. So if you do have Spirit-filled eyes and you are seeing the need of compassion, it's way more than just feeling sorry about the situation, but it's actually being led into action. It's like genuine love. Genuine compassion is just like genuine love, where it's more than just words. It's more than just good thoughts. It's more than just good intentions. One of my biggest pet peeves is when I see on social media when something bad happens, our thoughts and our prayers. What does that mean? What does that mean? That's not compassion, right? And I know oftentimes we knock our immigrant parents. If you have immigrant parents like myself, or if you have immigrant grandparents, or if you have immigrant maybe aunts and uncles, sometimes we kind of knock them because they never express words, or they never express their love by words, right? I never really grew up hearing the words "I love you" from my parents. My dad one time actually said he loved me before I went to seminary, and it was like the most awkward conversation ever. Like I was literally about to leave the house, go into the car, and he hugged me and says, "I love you." I'm like, okay. I just didn't even know how to respond, right? That's right or wrong. That is just not really necessarily said a lot in the, at least in an immigrant household like I lived in. But what I do know, though, is that my parents tangibly demonstrated love to me day in and day out. Even now, right? But I still remember, they would work for 12 hours. They'd leave the house, that's not even including the commute. If I actually factor in the commute, it's 14-hour days. They'd leave the house at 6, they'd get to the dry cleaner, get it all ready, opened up at 7. They work till 7, they close up, and they come home, it's roughly 8 o'clock. And then at 8 o'clock, my mom, she's exhausted, she's been helping customers, she's been dealing with hot steam presses and all that stuff. And it's a mom and pop owned dry cleaner, so they don't have a lot of employees. They actually have no employees, just the two of them. And they're super exhausted, but guess what? I had every single day of my life. A fresh, home-cooked meal every single evening. No matter how tired she was, she would still make an incredibly delicious meal every single night. And after that, she would do the dishes. We didn't, like good Asian families, we didn't run the dishwasher, so she would do the dishwasher by hand, or dishes by hand. And then I'm in my room, doing my homework, doing my studies, and then without fail, clockwork, come 9 o'clock, she would come in with freshly cut fruits on a platter with a nice small little fork, and it's all peeled, and all the seeds are taken out, and there it is. Every day, without fail. My wife says I was spoiled. I say I was loved. That was my mom's expression of love to me. It was tangible. I never heard the words "I love you," but I experienced it every single day. That's what compassion is. If we have spirit-filled eyes and we genuinely say we have compassion, it's way more than just good intentions. It's way more than good thought. Compassion, it's got to be tangible. It's got to be active. So being tangible, what we're trying to get at here is that not every single one of us here in this place are going to become career missionaries. I get that. But to have compassion means that we are going to participate in the work that God does, locally and globally. Compassion means that we're going to participate in the work that we do locally with Oak Cliff, with Ronald McDonald House, and some other things that we're working on. Compassion means that we're going to participate in things that God does globally, whether that means to go on short-term mission to Ensenada or to other places that we're working on. It means to be active. It means to be tangible. Parenthetically, if you are interested in going to UGO next year, Ensenada, for short-term mission, we're going to send out an email reminder this week to take sign-ups. So if you're interested, we're going to start taking sign-ups for them. That is a tangible act of compassion. Tangible means providing prayer for missionaries, having relationships with the missionaries, so that you know them, that you can pray for them. But also tangible compassion, as I said last week, is financial support. If you can't go, then we can fund these missionaries who have been supported or who have been called by God to do the work that God is calling them to do. Our participation in that and to be tangible is for us to help fund that incredible work. That is what it means to have compassion-filled eyes. It's more than just feeling sorry. It's more than having good thoughts. It's more than having good intentions. True compassion leads to action. So either we go or we send, but we must participate. It is not an option. That is what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. That is what it means to be a disciple. And that is why Jesus is calling us that the harvest is so plenty, but the workers are few. And God is inviting all of us to participate in what He's already doing, to be part of the workers, to be part of the solution. What I'm going to do here, I've been doing this for the past several weeks, I'm actually going to invite Wayne up here. And Wayne, if you don't mind coming up here. Take that mic. Sure. That makes more sense. All right. So Some of you guys know Wayne, others of you guys don't know Wayne. Wayne and I have been friends now for 12 years. Wayne and Gina have been part of our church from the pretty much go. They've been just an incredible blessing for us. But instead of me talking about you, Wayne, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit and share with the church who you are and maybe your background.
Go ahead and keep talking about this. And by the way, you sure do a great job for not preparing. I've been moved. Don't prepare so much. No. I know that feeling. A little bit about myself. I'll keep this short, really, but I have a really vanilla background, and I'm not referring to the fact that I'm white, but that's true too. But I grew up in Midwest, Dayton, Ohio, and it's like industrial city, and from Ohio, and it was unremarkable. I can't say anything about the beaches of Southern California. We had a beach somewhere, in Dayton, probably some lake anywhere. But grew up, and then grew up in a Christian family. My parents really instilled in me a lot of Christian teaching, but I didn't know the Lord. I remember when my whole family had trusted Christ and been baptized, and I thought, wait a minute, my older brother and my younger sister, what's wrong with me? And finally I said, okay, let's get this over with. And I walked an aisle, and my uncle, who was the pastor, baptized me, and that was it. But it wasn't until I graduated from high school, between that summer after graduating, that I first really confronted my lostness and my need for Christ in an authentic way. And I bent my knee, literally got down on the ground and prayed to God and said, I'm ready to trust you fully. And life began to really change at that point. So I went off to a large university in the center of Ohio, but I wasn't there very long because my life really wasn't taking the shape I wanted it to. So I transferred to a very small college of 600 students, but it was a Christian college called Grace College up in Indiana. And that again was another step. And along the way, just sharing a little bit about my life, and I resonate so much with Sungay, as she was led in so many different ways. I mean, goodness, her background, where she lived in Hong Kong and Germany and Juilliard, then all these things, and you just continually noted that God was leading you, and the Spirit of God was leading you each way. And I didn't know it so much at the time. God was really leading me. Went to France as a short-term missionary for a summer. I started a little singing group. I was majoring in broadcast journalism. That was my real desire in life from the time I was in high school. But I also dabbled in music. But when we had an opportunity to take this group through a summer to France and 6 other countries of Europe, I prayed about it a long time, all 5 seconds, and said yes. Yeah, we'll go. And we went, and God just absolutely blew my mind. I hadn't been outside of Ohio and Indiana. And all of a sudden I was seeing the world for the first time, and my life was just transformed, especially by a Christian center, a remodeled castle that was a youth center in the middle of France, where then I ultimately decided when I finished college, and I did, I would go back and work at this Christian Encounter Center, and I did, and went back after college, and unfortunately I was going to be there for some time, long time, and it was the intention, but after a shorter time than I wanted and had committed to, it was discovered that I had a disease called ileite, and that's French for ileitis, and you probably still don't know what that is. Now we call it Crohn's disease. And the only way to treat it back then was throw medicines, and then it usually never worked, and so they just kept taking stuff out. And as time went on, I realized that my future in missions was probably going to be compromised. that and some personal things, decided I'd go back to seminary and finish my seminary. That's when I met Gina, and she was a college student, and I was in seminary. And that's what us seminary guys did. We just kept looking at the new crop of really pretty college kids and girls, and she fell madly in love with me. And not before, though, that I fell madly in love with her. And so we married, and it was interesting that she made a commitment to serve the Lord in missions in her future. We didn't know where that was going to lead us, and we had no idea. We left there, came to Georgia after seminary, came to Georgia for 3 years, was an associate pastor while I was still trying to figure out how to live with this disease. And was a youth pastor just up here in Marietta. And then and as things went on, we realized our destiny was not going to be what we had suspected. That was to go to France. But it was going to be something else. And I accepted a really miraculous call to a senior pastor position in Richmond, Virginia. And so we moved there and went there and thought maybe this will be short term, and I'll get healthier and we'll be able to see the Lord's will fulfilled in our lives. At least our desire was to go in the mission field. But it was not going to happen. But the Lord kept leading and leading. And while I was a pretty young guy still and pastoring this church, as it was growing, I was invited to be on the board of directors of a mission that's now called Encompass World Partners, located up in Indiana initially, and then moved here to Atlanta. And for about 10 years, I was on this board, and we insisted that, and that board was really involved. We traveled, sometimes I traveled a couple times a year. The church would send me out, often pay for those trips so that I could accompany our director and work with our missionaries. And since I was a pastor, it was welcomed by most of the missionaries. So that's pretty much our history. And then for the last, but then about in the 1990s, something really profound happened in our lives. Very, very strong leading of the Lord. I'll go into in a minute. But we then decided that the Lord was calling us indeed to missions, but in a very different position, in a very different role. And for the last 23 years, up until I retired a few years ago, for those 23 years, I was mostly the director for Asian ministries with Encompass World Partners.
Thank you for sharing that, Wayne.
It's a nutshell, yeah.
A lot, right? A lot of history, a lot of experience there. Can you share a little bit about kind of even what we talked about here today, how the way in which you had envisioned participating in the work of missions and the way God had then sculpted that? Can you share a little bit about that transition and how that was still a way in which you were able to participate, now being the director for missions in Asia with Encompass, and what that experience was like and how you participated in the work of missions through that manner?
Yeah, I'm an old guy, as you know, and you probably haven't heard the names Keith Green or Michael Griffiths, or maybe some of you have, yeah, and there was a massive movement in the 80s and then on into the 90s of young people being challenged to go to the world and to really live for Christ. And one of the things that happened in the early 90s was a movement called AD 2000 and Beyond, started by Dr. David Wang, a Chinese man from Beijing, and also Dr. Luis Bush, who was an Argentine, grew up in Brazil mostly, and another guy, Alan Lowe, who was from Malaysia, from Jakarta. These men envisioned Asians going to the world as a massive force of evangelism to lead the world to Christ. And that had just fascinated me. And I began to really put together the pieces of this big picture, the harvest, this plentiful harvest that Pastor Peter was talking about, and realized, that passage in Romans 10 that says, how can they hear unless they be sent, etc. How can they know if they don't know who to believe? How can they know if no one's heard? And I realized the vast majority of the world that had never heard and not even had an opportunity to hear the gospel was in Asia, was Asian. Billions, literally. There are 81,000, and statistics really aren't necessarily inspired, but this one really touched me, and that was that I realized someone had done the evaluation and accounting and realized that there was something around 80-some thousand people that were dying every day somewhere in the world where they could not have heard the gospel even if they wanted to. They could not find it even for some reason they would want to. That began to keep me literally awake at night. And my church began to see that too and realized that this was time for me to move on. They didn't tell me that, I told them that, and that it was time for me to move back into full-time missions. And so when I joined Encompass Mission Organization, the director was a man who I'd worked with back in France and who became my lifetime mentor and my dearest friend. And he said, Wayne, I think we have a place for you where you could live in the United States, where you could get the health care that you need that's pretty demanding and pretty is significant. But you could live in the United States and yet reach the world, a large part of the world. I said, well, what's that? He said, become the director of Asia. And I said, well, wouldn't I want to live in Asia? And he said, if you think about it, it's easier to get from here to parts of Asia that we're involved in than it is to live in one of those places and try to get from one place to another. Let me tell you why. Because Asia is everything east of Istanbul and the Ural Mountains, and so you're thinking, so Turkey, here are the countries that I began to become the director of our teams throughout these countries: Turkey, Kyrgyzstan, Eastern Russia, Japan, Philippines, Cambodia, Thailand, I'm missing one, Vietnam, Iraq, where we helped to launch during the Iraq War, a free medical clinic with a church in Ohio we worked with, and then Long Beach, California. You say, well, wait a minute, Long Beach is not in Asia. Well, it kind of is. It's the far, far east Asia. It's where, if it's not in Asia, Asia is in Long Beach, that's for sure. We started a Japanese returning ministry because we discovered that young people, when they left their country, like in particular Japan, and they came to the universities in Southern California, they were coming to Christ. But then they would have to return because the government made them come back, and parents, and they would come back to Japan, and they became ambassadors to share the gospel and the good news over there. So I said, well, it's too big to miss. It's a wonderful challenge, and so there were only a few countries at that time. We jumped into it and said, Gina and I said, yeah, this is God. So.
Thank you for sharing that. Just a couple more questions as we wrap up our time.
Yeah.
From your experience and from your perspective, especially being a director of missions for Asia and being involved in so many different places in the world for 23 years, why is it important for a church like ours? It might be an obvious question, but I'd love to hear from your perspective. Why is it important for a church like ours to be engaged with global missions?
Well, the Bible mandates it. For one thing, it's important because it's, as you've said the last 6 weeks, it's something that the scriptures make as a high priority. When you think about it, I know this will sound trite, but Jesus is a missionary. I mean, after all, in Philippians chapter 2, he gave up this, hang on to his right to be God and with God and in heaven. He came to earth, what for? And we all know what that's for, what it was for. And he became, so to be in sync with the spirit and the heart of God himself is to be sharing the good news with the rest of this world for which Jesus died and became a missionary, sent as a missionary. But the church, and some of the challenges are, there are a lot of By the way, Christianity, true Christianity, is the fastest growing religion, if you please, or movement in the world. We think sometimes it's, oh, Islam is growing so fast. Well, if it's growing at all, it's only birth or persuasion, usually persecution. And nothing else is growing as fast as the good news of Jesus Christ and people believing in Him around the world, and where that mostly is happening in Asia. I think our church, because we are Asian, almost all of us, we are, distinctively that. We have a responsibility and an opportunity to go to our own people in many ways, to go to that place where most of us find our heritage and find our background, where many of them still cannot hear the gospel. This church has been really blessed. Gina and I have been so blessed to be here. Pastor Peters, we had pretty high demands when we were looking for a church. I mean, a former pastor, what are you gonna, you're not gonna look at this very lightly, and missionaries and all that. So we looked very closely, and we were so pleased with what we found here. And I think that the values of our church, the commitment to the Lord Jesus Christ, the commitment to Scripture, the commitment to church planting. In fact, that's why we hung around at first, because it was just being planted. The seed was barely sprouting, and look at it now. And that has been our heart as well. So I think that, and then our resources are immense. Last week, Pastor shared a lot about our resources. I know churches that commit their budgets as high as 50% of their giving goes to global or goes to outreach. Good starting point for a lot of churches, many churches, is around 10%. And we can do that. We can do that as a church, as a facility. And if I could add one more thing as a church we could do is begin to think of our responsibility, not only enter into it ourselves as either prayers or givers and maybe going, but to think about our cribs and our cradles in which lie future missionaries. From the very beginning, and I think probably because Sangye is involved in Kids Point and leading that it's going to be guaranteed. But if we would prepare our children and begin early and tell them, here is what true success is all about. And even, I've seen it the other day, and I was doing a little inventory, Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, University of Chicago. I can go down the list of some of the most prestigious schools in all of the world were started to send missionaries. They were started to prepare people for ministry and for missions. Some of the greatest mission statesmen of the past were like Harvard grads or Princeton grads, etc. And when was the last time we thought, I want my son or my daughter to go to this particular place or this particular school to do this really well and to perform and succeed, in order that they might go to Mali and work in a very poor country, and or go to Vietnam or wherever. So those are things I think that kind of can fit our church as we develop this portfolio for missions.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Pastor Wayne. Let's give him a big round of applause. As we wrap up our time, here, not just today, but in our season here, I think it's a great reminder for us that the church exists not for ourselves. And I know that's kind of almost a misnomer in one sense, because a lot of times the way the church is talked about in the United States is really for us, right? It's designed for us. It's designed where we feel comfortable. It's designed so that we're fed. It's designed where our needs are met. It's designed that our kids are taken care of. It's designed so that our youth kids are ministered to. It's designed so that we're ministered to. It's very me-focused, right? But if you actually look at the church in Scripture and you look at the church globally, or what's happening here in Scripture, what you see is a church from the very get-go, from its very design, was to be outward focused. Not me focused, but outward focused. You know, reminiscing back again 12 years ago when we first started this church, that's what we were. We're all about outward focus. We started this church to reach the broader community here, right? And I think it's a great opportunity, a great reminder for us as we transition from this place to a new place. We're going to be a little bit discombobulated. I actually like discombobulation. If you guys get to know me, like, I love change. I love discombobulating people to the point where people hate me because I love change so much. I'm so happy we're moving in that one sense. Our first 5 years as a church, we moved every year. Every year we moved to a different place, every year. And I think, though, when you do that, it discombobulates you. And when then you get discombobulated, it takes you out of your comfort zone. And it makes you trust in God. And it, again, reminds you why you exist. That's not about us. It's not for our comfort. And so as we go into this new space, the danger is like, wow, we have this new place. It's ours. And we can make it our own. And we can make it as comfortable as we want. But rather, as we close our chapter here and enter into our new space there, to be reminded that space is not for us to be comfortable. That space is for us to continue to participate in what God is doing both locally and globally. And for us to remember that God is giving us this incredible resource, not for our comfort, not for ourselves, but for us so that we can continue to participate in the great harvest